Hello, and welcome to this session about getting the most of AutoYaST in 2022. My name is Imobach, and I will be your host during this session. First of all, I would like to have a look to the agenda. Although I know this is an intermediate level session, I would like to do a quick introduction about AutoYaST. Then we are going to jump into dynamic profiles. Dynamic profiles are a way to build a profile that can be adapted during installation. So using the same profile, you can install several machines, even if they are slightly different. So you can adapt the profile to each situation. Then we are going to have a look to profile generation and especially to profile validation because it's pretty important if we are talking about dynamic profiles. And last but not least, I would like to mention and have a look to configuration management systems integration. Okay, so you can combine AutoYaST with Salt or with Puppet, for instance. Although I will be the one presenting in this session, there is another person that have been working with me in preparing the session, which is Áncor González. Both of us work for the system management department. Specifically, we work on the yast team. We develop yast and AutoYaST. So let's start. AutoYaST is, as you already know, a tool that allows to perform an unattended installation or upgrade of OpenSUSE and SUSE systems. Okay, so it allows not only to install or to upgrade the system, but it's also possible to configure an already installed system because many yast modules have support for AutoYaST. So you can not only install the system, but if you have an already installed system, you can use AutoYaST to automatically configure that system. It's able to do, well, the same things that yast can do: partitioning, network setup, software installation, bootloader installation, etc. The only thing that AutoYaST needs is basically an AutoYaST profile, which is an XML document explaining how the system should look like at the end. Let's have a look to a simple, minimal profile. You can see that this profile have two different sections. One is for users. We are defining the root user, so we can set a password for the root user. And in the second section, the software section, we are just selecting which product we should install. In this case, it's SUSE Linux Enterprise Server. This profile is rather minimal, but AutoYaST is going to perform the partitioning. It's going to install the bootloader, install whatever, a lot of stuff which is not mentioned here. And that's one of the good parts. AutoYaST relies in yast, and yast will be able to propose a sensible configuration for your partitioning, a sensible configuration for bootloader and other stuff. So you do not need to define every single aspect of your system. You only need to specify the things that you want to be in this way, if you want to change something away from the defaults. And that's everything I wanted to say about AutoYaST. Now let's jump into dynamic profiles. If you have to install several machines, maybe writing one profile for each of them, well, is not can be rather inefficient. If all the machines are just exactly the same, if all of them have the same capabilities and so on, you can just use a single profile. But in some cases, you would like to adjust the configuration depending on, for instance, of the hardware where the system is running, or in the network where it's being installed, etc. So you can, with dynamic profiles, you can install many machines that are slightly different or very different with just a reduced set of profiles. You have like three different mechanisms to create profiles, dynamic profiles. One of them are rules, which allows you to combine many XML files into a single profile. Another one is embedded Ruby, which is a fairly new feature we will talk about that in a minute. But it basically allows you to embed Ruby code in your profile, so your profile is modified dynamically, somehow pre-processed. And you have, of course, the all good scripts, the pre-installation scripts. You can use Shell, you can use Ruby, you can use Python to modify the profile while just right before starting to install the system. Let's start talking about rules. Rules is an old mechanism that allows us, I have said, to combine several XML files to create a final profile to be used. It's an old mechanism, but it's not going anywhere. I mean, it's not going to be deprecated. Some users got the impression when we introduced ERB that the ERB was going to replace rules, and that's not the case, okay? It's just another mechanism. It's usually associated with classes. Even if you check AutoYaST documentation, you can read rules and classes. But let's say they are kind of orthogonal features, and you can use rules without having to use classes and the other way around. So basically, you can combine several XML files, and in order to decide which files you would like to combine, you can check the hardware, the memory, disk, the architecture, etc. Or you can check the network configuration just in case the system is deployed in a given network, or you can even create your own rules. So let's have a look to one example so we can know better what we are talking about. First of all, I would like to to install a system. I have two different networks. 1.0 is 2.0, and one network is for marketing and the other one is for engineering. So what I'm going to do is to select a base profile to work with. If we are working in the 1.0, I'm going to get the marketing.xml profile. If I'm working in 2.0, I'm going to get engineering.xml profile. Okay, so this file is a rules file that defines these conditions. Okay, it's served as, it's created as a separate to the profiles. It's a separate file. Okay, it contains all the rules, and I'm going to combine many profiles depending on these rules. But well, you can do not only select one profile for installation, but you can merge many profiles. So in this case, what we are going to do is basically, I would like to use the second disk of any machine to create a data partition, a partition that is going to be mounted as data with an X4 file system. But it might happen that some of those systems does not have a second disk. So that's something I can use the rules for. Let's say this one is the marketing.xml base profile. Okay, it's not full because well, it might be rather long, but that's the interesting part. It defines a drive SDA where I'm going to put the system partitions. All my system partitions are going to be there. But if I have a second disk, I would like to use that second disk to be mounted in a data partition. Okay, so this is the original profile. This is the rule. So I say, okay, this size, if this SDB disk is bigger than 20 gigs, for instance, I'm going to include the definition of the data drive. Okay, and I would like to have a new drive element. I do not want to merge both drive elements. I want to keep a new one. And this file, the data drive.xml, might be something like this. It's going to use the SDB disk, okay, and it's going to be mounted in data as X4 file system. The result in those systems that have a second disk with that space should be something like this. If my system does not have a second disk, the rule does not apply, and this data drive section is not included. So you have the original section here, and you have the additional section here. Okay, so you can build your profile combining many profiles depending on a set of conditions. That's basically the approach of rules. But sometimes if you need to adjust a small value at some place, for instance, a device name or a size or something like that, it might be overkill having to create the base profile, the rules file, and the profile you want to merge just to change a small value. Ideally, you can do that with a pre-script, but we decided to introduce this new feature in SUSE Linux Enterprise S15 SP3. The idea is that you can embed Ruby code within your profile. If you think about that, it's like using PHP, for instance, or Jinja in case of Python. You get a profile that can run some code, is some kind of pre-processing of the profile, and you get a final profile with all the information. We have introduced a set of so-called helpers that are basically Ruby functions that allows you to detect, for instance, if you are installing a EFI system, or it allows you to iterate through the disk and get information from about the disk that the system have, network cards, or operating system release on hardware in general. We have a function that gives you a lot of information about hardware. But the best way to understand how this works is through some examples. So let's start with this one. Let's say that I have a system with 2 disks or any number of disks, more than one, and I would like to install the system in the smallest disk and to install the home partition in the biggest one. So what can I do? I can do this. This is a Ruby code. It's enclosed in between those percentage signs. Basically, this is one of our helpers. So what we are doing here is finding out the disk which have the minimal size of all the disks that I have. And that information will be stored in this variable, okay? And later on the next line, I'm just basically using the device name. So the device element will have the value /dev/sdv, SDA, or whatever. Okay, so I'm basically replacing that part of Ruby code with the value of the name. Okay, it's like printing somehow the name of the device there. And below I am doing just the opposite. I'm searching for this with the max size, and I'm doing just pretty much the same. I'm putting the name in the device element of the drive. Okay, it's basically about replacing a small value at some point. But if I'm interested, I can also render parts of my profile in a conditional way. For instance, if I'm using an EFI file system, I would like to define the EFI partition because maybe I want to change something from the defaults. Okay, the size or whatever, no problem. You are going to render that part of the profile only if boot EFI is true. If that's not the case, this section disappears from the profile and it's not rendered. Okay, this section just does not appear there. Okay, so you can print or include a small value, or you can just render a whole section in a conditional way. And we can combine both of them. In this case, we have a set of network interfaces, and I would like to configure the one which is connected, for instance. It's a nice exercise. We are basically searching the network cards, ordering to be sure that we always use the same order of the network cards, and we are finding the first one that have a cable connected. If I do not get any weak link, I'm not going to render this section of the profile. But if I find something with link, I'm going to use that device name, that it might be 80, MP1 is 0 or whatever, and it will be included in the device element. So I'm searching the first network card which is connected. I will install and I will set up that network card. So you can combine many helpers and different approaches to have really dynamic profiles. But as I have said, ERB is a rather young function, another young feature, sorry. So we might need to add more helpers, especially URL related helpers. We have identified that that is one of our one of the weak points of ERB. I will show you an example in just a minute. We would like to make easier for you to work with snippets and to include another file like we might do with rules. It should be something easy to do. Actually, it's not, but it should be. We would like to offer a way for you to create your own helpers, so you can extend the functions that you have to check for hardware conditions, etc. It's something that you can already do, but it's quite tricky. So we would like to have a good way to do it. And of course, we are interested in any use case you can think of. If you think that ERB might solve some of your issues when building AutoYaST profiles, please let us know. We are very interested in that. About working with the snippets and URL handling, I have prepared a small example to show you how we are not there yet. In this case, I'm just searching for the SDB disk. Okay, it's not a problem. And I'm going to include this XML file, like rules. It's pretty much the same. The problem is that if, for instance, I usually prefer having all my profiles and my partial profiles in the same place. So if I move my profiles to a different server, I might need to adapt the URL of all of them, which is far from ideal. And additionally, I'm not I cannot use ERB to preprocess those profiles and so on. If you want to don't have to adjust the URL, I'm not talking about the ERB preprocessing because that's not included here. But if you would like to be able to move all your profiles to another place, you can do this. But well, it's far from ideal. And we need to find a better way, so it's only a one-liner for you. Because, well, I know just internals, I was able to write this code, but by no means is what we want you to do. So that's something that we need to fix or to improve in the near future. Oh, and the question is rules or ERB? Well, it depends on the use case. Both approaches are different, although in the future, maybe ERB might replace, might be an alternative to rules and classes in many cases, or in all cases. But at this point, let's say that they are just different approaches. One of them, ERBs, in my opinion, is less verbose, more readable, and you don't need to keep a separate files or many separate files, the rules files, and so on. But maybe the way that the rules have to merge the XML files might be convenient for your use case. So, sorry, I don't have an answer, but use whatever you think it might be better for your use case. Last but not least, I would like to talk about pre-installation scripts. Sometimes rules or ERB might be overkill, or they might fall short. Maybe you could use an old good script to do the job. So a pre-installation script is just a script that runs against your profile, and it's able to modify the profile and generate a new one. For instance, to disable a small flag or to do small things, it might be interesting. But if you want, you can use Python, Ruby, Perl, and you can do more complex things. Anyway, you are limited somehow by the libraries that you have installed in your system, in the installation media, sorry. So the installation media contains the libraries you need, you can use them, but if they are not there, you might need to patch or to remaster the installation media. So, well, pre-installation scripts are a nice way to do simple things, in my opinion. Let's see a few examples. One of them, in this example, we're basically searching for a given network device, and we are replacing this netdef with the name of that device and generating a new modified XML profile that will be rewritten by AutoYaST. So it's a simple way to work. And here we have a combination of ERB and scripts. We could, for instance, try to locate the first network card, take the MAC address, and use it to retrieve a profile that has the same name as my MAC address. So I'm basically injecting some value from my helpers in a prescript, and it's going to work. Let's go with profile generation and validation. We have been talking a lot about dynamic profiles and so on, which is great. But well, if we are talking about that kind of profiles, it might be a little bit hard to debug a problem in that profile. You need to start the installation and see how it works, etc. So first of all, you have like 3 different ways to generate a profile that I can think of. One of them is creating the profile from scratch. That's not exactly true. You usually have many profiles in your disk, and you select one piece of this one. I use another one as a base, and I combine them. But let's consider that writing the profile from scratch. The other one is generating the profile from an existing system, which is what we call cloning. And you can also use the AutoYaST UI. There is the third option. To clone a system, we have the clone system just command. The problem is that it usually generates a lot of information. It's a big XML file with a lot of information, entries, well, it configures a lot of things and so on. So in SP3, we introduced the compact mode, which is basically we clone the system, but we only export the relevant parts. If you are using default values, we are going to omit that. If you are using things that like reporting and other stuff, we are going to remove those settings. So we try to only export the relevant parts. Of course, you can do partial cloning and so on, but that's not new in SP3. Only the compact mode is new in SP3. And now, and this interesting part, profile validation. Until now, AutoYaST only offered XML-based syntax validation. So if you have a profile, you can run Gin or XML lint, and you know if your profile is well-formed or not. No semantic checks, no rules processing, no ERB processing, nothing. So starting on even starting in SP15 Service Pack 3, we added the automatic validation at runtime by using XML. So when you are installing, we check that the profile is well formed or not. But it's the same validation, no special, no semantic checks or something like that. So that's the bad part. Let's say it's a kind of limited validation. However, we have introduced in SP3 the check profile command. The check profile is able to run the regular XML-based validation, but also process rules and classes. It runs optionally ERB and pre-scripts, and it tries to read the profile, the generated profile. So at the end, you can have a look to the profiles, how it should look like when it's being used. So you don't need to start an AutoYaST installation to check that it works as you expect. You can do it in your own system. And I think that it's a pretty cool feature. If you compare that with just only checking that XML was well formed. For that, we have the check profile command that allows you to import the profile, to generate the resulting one so you can inspect. You can, as I have said, deal with rules, and you can also run pre-scripts and ERB templates. So it's easier for you to inspect how the profile will look like at the end. And well, last but not least, I would like to talk a little bit about configuration management systems integration. It's not exactly dynamic profiles, but it's a way to connect AutoYaST with systems like Salt. Basically, the idea is that AutoYaST does the initial installation, partitioning, networking setup, registration, software installation, etc. And then it passes the control to Salt or Puppet. In this case, Salt is officially supported, Puppet is not, but it's in an experimental support, okay? And there is also support for SUSE Manager, parameterizable salt formulas, which is basically you can define in a YAML file a set of forms that the user can fill, and that information is passed to Salt. So it can use that information to create to run Salt with the given parameters. For instance, if you have a Salt master server, you can connect to at the end of the installation to that server, and you can apply the configuration that you get from that server, and AutoYaST will take care of that. Or in masterless mode, even you don't need a server. You can just ask AutoYaST to pass this information to Salt, and Salt will make the changes to the underlying system. And here we have an example of a salt parameterizable, of a SUSE Manager parameterizable salt formula, which is basically asking for a lot of information, and that information will be used by Salt to install and to configure the system. And that's basically it. Thanks a lot for watching this session, and please let us know if you have any questions. We will be happy to help you. Thank you.